And so they've got huge inertia to that change, their culture, reward system, and so forth. And so what happens is that industry is almost always changed or pushed to more of a commodity by somebody who's not encumbered by pre-existing business model. So in the case of infrastructure, it's Amazon, started the explosion of growth of new higher order systems, causing disruption of past industries stuck behind inertia barriers. No different from electricity, formation of Hollywood, disruption of gas lamp lighters. Of course, those new higher order systems that build, they eventually commoditize as well, going through the same cycle. They become very successful, building up inertia barriers, and the whole thing repeats. And you get three different phases. You get this peace margin phase in industry, which is one of relative competition. You're number one, I'm number one. It's where sustaining change exceeds disruptive. Then you have a war disruption phase, normally started by somebody else. Suddenly, it's a fight for survival. Disruptive change exceeds sustaining. And then you have a build and growth phase, an age of wonder. And that cycle occurs in local to small industries. It also occurs at a macroeconomic scale. And a macroeconomic scale, they're called K-waves, Kondratiev waves. But we normally call them ages, like the industrial age, the mechanical age, the railway age, etc. And everyone follows exactly the same path. Build and growth, peace and margin, followed by this war phase. And the war phase is the disruption between one cycle and another. And every time that occurs, new forms of organization appear who take advantage of these new practices that have appeared. So with the age of electricity, which was sort of started off by Edison, but wasn't really, we got things like Hollywood, we got disruption of gas lamp lighters, we also got Fordism, because he was using those new practices, including electricity and light bulbs, and he happened to work previously with Edison as well. And in the internet age, well, we got the same sort of thing. The internet age was all about the commoditization of the means of mass communication, explosion of growth, emerging practices, new forms of organization, Web 2.0, disruption of pre-existing industries stuck behind inertia barriers who naturally respond with Stop My Competitors Act. It's all the same. Recap. Standard process of evolution driven by user and supply competition. Creates a cycle of change, commoditization, causing explosions of innovation. It's not just activities that evolve practices, how we use them co-evolve as well. As a result of that co-evolution, we also therefore incur transition costs. Transition costs are one of the inertia barriers to change. Those inertia barriers are important because they actually break the three different cycles of the peace margin, war disruption phase, and build growth phase. And that can occur in a local ecosystem. It can also occur at the macroeconomic scale, Kondratiev waves. Those we normally call ages, like the industrial age. Every time we go through one of these cycles, whether it's small or large, in the war phase, we get formation of new forms of organization which exploit the new practices. So the one thing we learn from history is commoditization enables growth, enables emerging practice, enables new forms of organization, and causes disruption of past industry stuck behind inertia barriers. Eureka, that's been going on for about 250 years. So organization. How are we changing today? Because this cycle is constant. And so we know, for example, the internet, commoditization, the means of mass communication, enabled Web 2.0 to form. So if cloud is simply about commoditization of a bunch of activities in IT, we should see the formation of a next generation of companies. So last year, I published some work which had looked at about 250 different organizations across about 100 different parameters. And what we discovered was there's the pre-Web 2.0 traditional organization. Then there's the Web 2.0 organization, which the pre-Web 2.0 traditional is learning from. It's learning the things like social media, etc. But in reality, everybody's doing social media these days. And then there's a new subgroup, a next generation of organization, which has appeared. And those practices will spread as well. So to compare them, it's worth just looking at traditional organization and comparing directly to next generation. So what do we have? Structure, traditional departmental. Next generation, cell-based. What do I mean by cell-based? Well, let's look at value chain evolution. Let's pretend you're an online shop. Well, that's not the only thing you do. There's a lot of underlying activities in that value chain, product catalog and so forth. And what we generally tend to do is, because we treat IT as IT, is do one-size-fits-all mentality across the whole place, which is great for the linear commodity, sucks for the innovation. Well, what companies like Amazon do is they don't do that. They break down everything into small components, and they run what is known as the two-pizza model. Everything in Amazon is built as a service, as a component which is used by others, and nothing is built by a team that is bigger than can be fed by two pizzas. If it is, they break it down further. And this allows much more direct focus. So another difference is focus, profit, next generation disruptive. That's purely the stage of cycle we're in. Another one is open source. We think about it as cost reduction. They think of it as a weapon. There's about 15 different ways of using it as a weapon against others. For example, if you think about iOS and its danger to Google's data value chain, the whole purpose of Android is to commoditize the activities of iOS, put Apple in a position against an entire ecosystem. In terms of practices, we think about scale-up, N+1 disaster recovery. They think distributed design for failure and chaos engines. Chaos engines particularly interesting. Amazon has somebody called a master of disaster, and their job is to run around the data center pulling out cables. In fact, it used to be a chap called Jesse Robbins, and he was so good, he went into one data center, pulled out a rack of machines, and sold it off to somebody else before anybody else could turn up. And the point about this is by constant introduction of failure, you increase resilience. And so this is why Netflix, when Amazon had problems, barely noticed. Another big change is learning. We use analysts, they use ecosystems. That's very important, but it's slightly complex. So we take a whole bunch of those linear commodity activities, and what they do is they put them online as utility services, provide an API. The purpose of this is to enable the formation of an ecosystem, enable others to innovate on top of the API. And you reduce their cost of innovation by providing it as a utility. Now, as those innovations spread, because they're consuming your API, you can spot the diffusion. And therefore, you can commoditize that activity to create a new set of services to encourage growth of the ecosystem. And this is a model known as innovate, leverage, commoditize. So if you take Amazon again, Amazon provide EC2S3. People built big data Hadoop systems on it. Lots of companies formed like Cloudera. So as it spread, Amazon released Elastic MapReduce. Now, the purpose of this is what they're doing is that cycle of change. They're running it on their own ecosystem, and they have all the data. And this enables them to simultaneously appear highly innovative, because lots of other people are doing the innovation, highly customer-focused, because they've got all the data, and highly efficient all at the same time, which is what Porter said you couldn't do. And the other problem about this is their ability to do it increases as their ecosystem grows. So as Amazon gets bigger, the cost reductions get more plentiful, their customer focus improves, and their rate of innovation goes up. They are what we would describe as having the benefits of economies of scale and being super linear in terms of innovation and customer focus. So as they get bigger, they get more innovative. So if you're worried about fighting Amazon today, 5 years' time, you'll be panicking. So the other thing is infrastructure. So traditional world's very much, expensive hardware, enterprise class hardware. Next generation, it's all commodity-based. And so what we have is here is the today of most companies. This is 5 to 10 years out. This is what most of you will transform into. Same with Fordism. Of course, you'll probably say, no, we'll never be like that. Lots of people said they would never be like Ford or the American system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But those are the practices which are likely to become common. Now, will this end? Well, fortunately, the presentation will. We're getting close to the end. But the cycle won't. It's ongoing. And the next wave is actually about commoditization of the means of manufacturing through 3D printing. And if you think that's far-fetched, and this is where printers print, entire both physical and electronic objects, so print a watch, It's no different from telling a gas lighter that 40 years from now, somebody's job would be broadcasting into a little box which would be on everybody's lounge. Of course, he would have thought that was fantasy. Of course, that was 40 years, and 20 years into the process, he had his what I call the WTF moment, because they'd gone through light bulbs, telephone, Fordism, and radio, so he was used to everything changing, and that's roughly where we are. So how do you gain an edge? Because that's the question I started with. Well, when it comes to cloud, there's two schools of thought. You can say, let's buy some technology, that solves the problem, which doesn't. Or you can realize that what's going on is a standard process of evolution driven by competition, both user and supply, which creates a standard cycle which has been going on for many hundreds of years. And in that standard cycle, we're seeing new forms of organization appear with new practices. So what you should be looking at is those practices. You should be thinking about how do we use things like ecosystems? How do we use open source as a competitive weapon? How do we use things like cell-based structures? And how do we apply those concepts and ideas to our organization's value chain, whatever that happens to be? That's how you go about creating an advantage. Now, there's 1,000,001 ways of doing this. Unfortunately, I didn't want this presentation to be fatal. So given that I've got 1 minute and 50 seconds left, I thought I'd end there. Thank you very much.